I had always heard stories about the Silent Queen, whispered in hushed tones across the trade routes of the outer colonies. She ruled the planet Virilia with a presence that could bend the will of anyone without ever uttering a single sound. Her people obeyed her instinctively, not because of fear, but because her silence demanded reverence. Scholars speculated endlessly on how she communicated, how she made decisions, how she inspired such loyalty without speech. I, Jaren Kale, a maintenance engineer sent by the Galactic Union, never thought I would see her or face her myself. I was supposed to conduct a routine inspection of the planetary capital's orbital relay station. Virilia had recently opened its gates to off-world commerce, and my job was simple: repair structural instabilities in the relay nodes that connected the planet to the Union's communication grid. It was supposed to be a standard assignment. Routine. Safe. I landed on Virilia's barren plains at dawn, greeted by a sky painted in muted lavender and teal hues. The winds carried a scent unlike any I had encountered, sharp, metallic, yet strangely sweet. The ground beneath my boots was smooth, almost polished, with veins of luminescent minerals running beneath the surface. It was beautiful, alien, and unsettling. From the moment I approached the capital, I sensed it. The city wasn't large by human standards, but it radiated an almost magnetic orderliness. Every building, every pathway, every light felt as though it had been meticulously placed by a mind that never rested. And at the center of it all, towering above the crystalline spires, was the Silent Queen's palace, a structure carved from black obsidian that shimmered faintly in the sunlight. The first few days passed uneventfully. My task was mechanical and my team was minimal, just me, my assistant Lyra, and a small drone fleet. We moved through the corridors of the relay station, patching energy conduits, recalibrating antennae, and sealing minor breaches in the outer hull. I had time to study the city from a distance. The inhabitants of Virilia moved in perfect synchrony. Not a word was spoken, yet the order they maintained was immaculate. They performed their duties with a precision that defied normal logic. Then, on the fourth day, my curiosity led me into a restricted zone near the palace. A narrow pathway wound through gardens of crystalline flora, each plant shimmering like spun glass. I was captivated, taking careful measurements of the terrain for possible structural anomalies. That's when I first saw her, the Silent Queen. She was seated on a throne carved from the same black obsidian as her palace, surrounded by attendants who hovered near her like shadows. Her form was elegant, almost otherworldly. Her skin shimmered with a soft iridescence, and her eyes, if one could call them that, were pools of liquid silver. Her hands rested lightly on the arms of her throne, and her gaze swept across the courtyard with a commanding grace that felt almost physical. And she did not speak. I froze. My human instinct screamed at me to leave, to retreat, but fascination rooted me in place. She was beautiful in a way I couldn't rationalize, terrifying in a way that made my chest tighten. Then, without warning, she rose, gliding across the courtyard with an elegance that made gravity seem optional. Her attendants parted as she approached, and for a moment it felt like time had stilled. "You are human," she said, not with words, but somehow I understood it, as if her intent pressed directly into my mind. I stumbled backward, startled. "Why, yes," I managed. "I'm here to repair the relay station." She tilted her head. A gesture. A silent acknowledgement. Then she returned to her throne. That was it. No further communication. Just the quiet authority of her presence. Over the next few days, I tried to maintain professional distance, focusing on my repairs while observing her from afar. Her people never interfered, never spoke to me. Occasionally, I would catch her watching me from the palace windows, a still silhouette against the dark obsidian. I began to feel a strange connection, a sense that she was aware of every small detail of my existence, my fatigue, my hesitation, even my curiosity. Then, disaster struck. A massive energy surge rippled through the relay station, triggered by a rare alignment of Aurelia's magnetic fields. Alarms blared, and the station shuddered violently. My instruments went haywire, and the safety protocols failed. My drone fleet went offline, and the conduits sparked dangerously. The station was minutes from collapse. I raced through the corridors, manual override panel in hand, sweat dripping from my brow. The power nodes hummed with lethal intensity. I could feel the energy building, a crescendo that threatened to tear the station apart. And then she appeared. The Silent Queen was there, standing at the edge of the main conduit chamber. Her attendants followed, but they held back, giving her space. She didn't touch anything, didn't interfere physically, but I could sense her presence influencing the very energy around us. The conduit's hum seemed to synchronize with her heartbeat, or at least I thought it did. I knew I couldn't rely on her. The Union hadn't sent me here to beg a queen for help. My survival and the safety of the station depended on action. I leaped onto the main energy panel, swinging my wrench and manually rerouting circuits. Sparks flew. Arcs of electricity danced dangerously close. My hands blistered. My muscles screamed. I could feel the station shaking, the floor trembling beneath me. And then she watched me. There was no expression on her face, no wordless command. Yet as I worked, I felt something change. The energy that had threatened to tear the station apart began to stabilize. The arcs of electricity softened. Sparks fizzled and died before reaching me. It was as if the station itself had recognized my determination and yielded to it. By sheer force of will, sweat, and instinct, I managed to stabilize the primary conduit just as a massive surge threatened to engulf the entire chamber. The station fell silent. Even the alarms had stopped. I collapsed against the wall, exhausted, scorched, and trembling. And then I looked up. The Silent Queen approached. Slowly. Her steps echoed like a heartbeat through the chamber. She knelt beside me, not in submission, but in a gesture of recognition. And then for the first time she spoke. Not with words, but with soundless understanding. A vibration in my mind, a resonance I had never experienced. Her presence flowed into me, and I comprehended her message fully. You are worthy. I gasped, unable to form words. My human mind struggled to translate the experience into anything comprehensible. She rose, stepping back to her throne, but her gaze never left me. Something had changed between us. She had ruled without words for centuries, and yet, somehow my fight, my human will to act against impossible odds, had broken through her silence. The following days were surreal. Her people no longer moved with mere instinct. They began to interact with me, cautiously at first, then more openly. The Silent Queen did not speak in the conventional sense, but her gestures, her presence, her subtle movements guided me in ways I could now understand. Repairs continued, and I began to learn more about Virilia, its people, and their incredible society. The moment of crisis had forged a connection between us that transcended speech. I realized that the Silent Queen's silence was not a limitation. It was a form of mastery. Her people had always been attuned to her intent, but now, through my actions, she had acknowledged that humans could rise to meet challenges in ways her subjects could not. Weeks later, the repairs were complete, and the Union inspection team arrived to certify the station's stability. I was commended for my efforts, but the real reward was something far more profound. I had glimpsed a consciousness unlike any other, and it had recognized me as an equal, not by words, not by formalities, but through the raw truth of my actions. Before I left Virilia, I approached the Silent Queen one last time. She stood at her palace balcony, gazing across the city that gleamed like a jewel under the lavender sky. I bowed, a gesture of respect and gratitude. She nodded, and for the first time, I felt certain that her silence was not emptiness. It was choice. It was power. It was understanding. And in that silence, I had found a bond stronger than any spoken promise. As my shuttle lifted off the ground, leaving the city and the Queen behind, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. Humanity had touched a world ruled by silence, and in doing so, had spoken a language even the most formidable monarch could not ignore. I glanced back at her silhouette against the palace, motionless and radiant, and for the first time, I understood what it meant to truly communicate without words. The Silent Queen had ruled without words for centuries, until a human's fight had broken her silence. And in that breaking, a new era began for her people, and for me. Before I left Virilia, I spent one last day in the city, walking among her people. For the first time, I heard the faintest whispers of communication, soft, melodic tones that seemed almost musical, though still nothing like human speech. They glanced at me with cautious curiosity, then returned to their work. There was respect in their eyes now, a recognition that I had become part of their story, if only briefly. The Silent Queen remained at her palace balcony, her form luminous against the black obsidian walls. I approached slowly, unsure of what gesture would be appropriate. She did not rise, did not speak, but her eyes met mine. In that instant, I understood that she had shared something far more personal than words could convey: acknowledgement, trust, even a measure of affection. I bowed deeply. "Thank you," I whispered, though I suspected she didn't need to hear it. She lifted her hand slightly, a gesture almost imperceptible, yet it felt like a benediction. Then she turned her gaze toward the horizon, toward the lavender sky, as if contemplating the future of her people. And then, as if the air itself had shifted, a soft ripple passed through the city, the tiniest shimmer of movement, like a pulse. It was subtle, yet it resonated deep within me. The Silent Queen had changed. I walked to the shuttle that would take me back to human space, pausing to look back at the city one last time. From this distance, the spires of Virilia glittered like a constellation brought down to the ground. And at the center, her palace remained unyielding, majestic, and impossibly alive. As the engines hummed and lifted me off the ground, I realized something extraordinary. She had not only ruled without words for centuries, she had thrived in silence, shaping a civilization with nothing but presence and intent. But my actions had proven that even silence could be broken by courage, determination, and resolve. A human fight had intersected with her reign, and in that intersection, something new had been born. I thought about the people I had met, the creatures whose language I could not speak, but whose actions I could understand. I thought about the Queen, her power absolute, yet her choice to acknowledge me voluntary. It was a lesson I would carry for the rest of my life. That connection does not always require speech, that understanding can exist in action, and that sometimes the greatest leaders do not command with words, they inspire through presence. Weeks later, back on Earth, I recounted the story of Virilia and its Silent Queen to anyone who would listen. Some called me crazy. Some believed me. But it didn't matter, because I knew the truth. The Queen's silence was a challenge, a test, and a gift. And I had faced it and survived. And in doing so, I had changed her world as much as she had changed mine. The last thought that stayed with me, as I drifted to sleep each night, was that somewhere on Virilia, a ruler who had never spoken before was now thinking differently. Perhaps she would consider new ideas, perhaps new ways to guide her people, perhaps even the possibility that silence was not always the answer. And somehow, I had been the one to spark that change, not with words, not with force, but with the stubborn, messy, human will to act when everything seemed impossible. As I closed my eyes, I knew this much. The universe was full of rulers, civilizations, and wonders beyond imagining. But few would ever understand the profound, quiet power of a queen who spoke without words, and fewer still would know what it meant when a human fight finally broke her silence. And somewhere on Virilia, the silent queen remained, her presence eternal, her judgment now tempered with the memory of a human who had dared to rise. I had come to repair a station, I had come to do a job. But I left with something far greater. The understanding that courage can transcend language, that action can pierce even the deepest silence, and that sometimes a single human can change the course of a civilization without ever raising their voice. The shuttle disappeared into the stars, leaving the silent queen and her people to continue their quiet, powerful reign. But I knew, somehow, that I had left a mark, not a scar, not a trace, but a memory, a possibility, and perhaps the beginning of a dialogue that would last far longer than my presence on that alien world. She ruled without words, but because of me, she had learned to listen.